Greetings. Okay, I think we are going to get started here. So it is a huge pleasure to welcome you today to the Insights in Action Tour closing webinar. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. And we're going to have an exciting hour together where we're going to be synthesizing some of the insights from the entire Insights in Action Tour and offering several options for engagement. My name is Ez Bridgman. I am a facilitator with Opus Group, and I will be your facilitator today of this session. And we have three main objectives of our time together today. First, we're going to be sharing what was accomplished in the Insights in Action Tour. We're also going to be providing updates and analysis related to each of the Future Skills Center's focus areas. And finally, we're going to be opening up a space to gather questions and counsel from you. I would like to take a moment and do a line acknowledgement. The Future Skills Center acknowledges that Toronto is situated upon traditional and current Indigenous territories that include the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes, and the Upper Canada Treaties. And as a pan-Canadian organization, the Future Skills Center respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. So let's dive into our agenda today for our hour together. We're going to have a check-in at the beginning, and then we're going to move into a keynote presentation, followed by a moment we'll be asking you for questions, a Q&A period, and also requesting your counsel, your thoughts, and finally a checkout period. And I have a few invitations for you in the call today. I'm seeing that there's great engagement in the chat already. So I invite you to continue engaging with the chat throughout. We have both the chat functions and also a Q&A function in the webinar, so you can use both of them. When it is the Q&A period, please feel free to share as many questions as you have. Even if we aren't able to answer all of them, it's still very helpful to have that record. And we'll be having a moment at the end to discuss next steps. So there's an invitation to consider how you would like to be involved. And even as we go through these presentations and all this content, thinking about how it connects to your role. So let's go forward with our check-in. So this is our first check-in question today. The question is, how do skills and training factor into some of the biggest issues in the news today? So for instance, I'm sure anyone who's been reading the news has been hearing a lot about tariffs, immigration reductions, border concerns. So this is a general question, and you can answer it in the way that you interpret it. How do skills and training factor into some of the biggest issues in the news today? And you can name specific issues or topics, or you can name sort of ideas about where do you see skills and training fitting into some of these themes that are very present in the news these days. So take a moment to think, and we'll begin to get some answers in the chat here. We have Lisa. Thank you, Lisa, for our first answer here. Reskilling is needed to support an AI-based economy. Exactly. Thank you, Lisa. Janet, who wrote, tariffs impact business productivity, which affects jobs and apprenticeships. Thank you. Brenda, who wrote, pivoting. Hello, welcome, Gary. Anyone else have any answers to this question? How do skills and training factor into some of the biggest issues that we're reading about in the news today? Chris wrote, to stave off job loss. It's a great point, Chris. A just transition requires new skills. Thank you, Heather. Ashley writes, opportunities to provide the workforce economics with the tools and means to adapt to change. Long-term resilience, skills and certification recognition across provincial boundaries will be important to overcome setbacks from imposed tariffs in the US. Thank you, Martha. Wow, the chat is on fire today. Beautiful work, everyone. I can see that we're going to have a really lovely time together. I'll read a few more and then pass it over for our keynote speaker. Joe, who wrote workforce preparedness and ongoing development. Forward thinking based on emergent jobs and careers from Wendy. Some of the existing training is outdated, especially due to AI, and that's a big issue. People can't afford to invest in their skills development because of the impacts on livelihood and the need to shift spending into basic stuff, which might disadvantage those who are already struggling with an economic standpoint. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Skills needs change quickly. Teaching resilience and the ability to learn are key. Trisha, transition workers from one sector to another, for instance, with tariffs. And one last comment here, demand aligned courses degrees lead to post-grad work permits and PR for international students. Thank you, everyone. So as you can see, skills and training are really front and center when we look at some of the biggest issues that we are seeing in the news today. So to speak to some of these themes and also touch on some of the work that FSC is doing in this regard, I would like to invite Noel Baldwin from the Future Skills Center forward, who'll be delivering our keynote today. And as we go through this, again, feel free to make note of questions or counsel that you might like to be offering afterwards. And we'll have a question and answer period afterwards. So make note of those ideas, questions, counsel. And I'll pass it over to you, Noel. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll miss the introductions that you've given me over the course of the Insights in Action tour, and really appreciate all the work that you and your colleagues at Opus Group have done to support all of this activity. It's been nearly a year now that we worked on it, right? So thanks very much. And thank you to all of you for being here today. As said, I'm Noel Baldwin. I'm the Executive Director at the Future Skills Center. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Nous sommes vraiment ravis de vous voir aujourd'hui avec nous pour cette webinaire de clôture de notre tournée. I know that lots of you are familiar with the Future Skills Center. Maybe even most of you know the backstory. But if you'll indulge me one more time, just to remind you, we opened our doors in 2019 with funding from the Government of Canada's Future Skills Program. And we're based at Toronto Metropolitan University and formed by a consortium that includes the Conference Board of Canada and Blueprint. And we work closely with Magnet and Diversity Institute, who are also a part of TMU, to deliver our mandate. And our mission is really to conduct research and try to generate insights about skills and skill development that's going to position Canadians to thrive in the future of work. And that's never been more important than in this moment that we're in right now. Our approach is really collaborative. We work with many of you and work with a range of partners across Canada, employers and labor, educational institutions and training providers, governments and community-based organizations. And the collaboration is crucial because preparing for the future of work is not a task that any single entity can accomplish alone. It requires a collective effort across sectors, across provinces and territories to create a resilient and adaptable workforce. And at FSC, I'm proud to say we're building quite a track record. Since our inception, FSC has now invested in more than 379 projects that are focused on skill development across the country, coast to coast to coast. And our work now includes more than 500 publications and a network of nearly 3,000 partners, also from coast to coast to coast. And what we're trying to do at the Future Skills Center is really to support the skills development ecosystem by investing in skills development, innovation, pilot projects, and research, evaluating the impact of those pilots and partnerships, generating critical insights from that work, scaling and expanding the impact of the most promising approaches, and then mobilizing all of this knowledge that we gather around what works and for whom and under what conditions out to this network of partners and stakeholders across the country. We're doing this through in-person events, which we'll talk about today, webinars like this one, briefings with government officials and stakeholders, roundtables, and opportunities for folks to come together to learn and discuss together what's happening with our labor market. And now through these investments, we've helped over 99,000 Canadians receive hands-on training or employment opportunities, equipping them with the skills that they need to succeed in this rapidly changing economy. Over 1 million people have accessed resources to help them on their journey through the changing world of work. And nearly 3/4 of the initiatives we've supported are serving groups that have faced historic and/or systemic barriers to opportunity in the labor market through training or education, like newcomers and people living with disabilities and racialized people. And we're doing all of this because our labor markets are under pressure from a number of trends that are driving challenges as well as opportunities. We know about the destabilizing effect of Trump's tariff threats. Will he, won't he, for how long, on what sectors? And even if the tariffs never come into place, most Canadians are showing this tremendous resolve and team spirit. We know we need to be in this for the long haul so that we build a resilient, skilled workforce with the right people, with the right skills, in the right places at the right times. And all this destabilization with Trump really compound other megatrends, like the shifting role of newcomers in filling labor market gaps, the accelerating changes brought about by technological advancements like artificial intelligence and our changing climate, as well as longstanding challenges in who has access to workplace training and who doesn't. So the Future Skills Center is committed to trying to lead the way, working with our partners, preparing Canada's workforces for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow, the ones that are right in front of us and beyond. And the priorities that are driving our work, we think, are the priorities that Canada's prosperity depends on. We're focused on building a resilient workforce by addressing two big drivers, climate change and technological change, that are really outside the direct control of most actors in Canada. Two systems level levers, maximizing worker mobility and pathways to jobs, and the adaptability of small and medium-sized enterprises that we can devote policy thinking and resources towards. And these are in service of achieving a really critical outcome, a more inclusive economic prosperity for all Canadians. I want to take a minute to look at each of these in a bit more depth, starting with pathways to jobs. In the current unpredictability of tariffs and the reorganization that's happening around international supply chains probably means that labor market volatility is here to stay. And that means more job displacement and movement, heightened risk of poor employment outcomes for many Canadians. And so some of the questions that are guiding our work in this area include, what are the key ingredients to helping individuals successfully transition to new employment opportunities or keep up with the evolving skill requirements of their jobs? And what are the roles of various stakeholders, and what are the attributes and mechanisms that we need to make sure that collaboration is maximized to build those pathways to jobs? And when we look at how we've invested our resources, this is actually the biggest part of our portfolio to date. We've invested in more than 100 projects, $137 million, and we've cranked out nearly 150 reports and publications on this. And it includes investment in really innovative delivery models that are helping Canadians transition from point A to point B in their career, relevant in every sector of our economy. Things like career guidance and micro-credentials and work-integrated learning, how to use technology to better deliver assessment and training, how to support mid-career workers, how to do employment engagement better. And a great example of this is our partnership with SkillPlan. And they're working with building trade unions across the country in every province to look at how to diversify the construction sector, create pathways into the skilled trades and make training more accessible. And they're using a pan-Canadian approach. They've integrated technology into a virtual recruitment and training system that features career exploration and assessments and learning opportunities and ultimately connections to jobs. And as a result, so far, more than 25,000 learners and 400 partner organizations, including colleges, community service organizations, and 14 building trade unions and employers, are using this platform and benefiting from this work. Now, when it comes to technology and automation, of course, the accelerating pace of change in artificial intelligence is going to keep transforming nearly every industry and many jobs. It can lead to significant disruption, but it also presents really significant opportunities, especially as we think about some of the long-standing challenges that Canada has had around productivity. But managing the integration of automation and artificial intelligence as its development continues to accelerate is really going to be critical to addressing the long-term opportunities for productivity growth in Canada. And some of the questions we're thinking about are what are the types of skills related or other initiatives and policies that we need to take advantage of the opportunities that the technology offers, but also mitigating some of the risks that we already know are built in to this technology and its adoption. And what are some of the specific skill development policies that can be implemented to prepare our workforce for technological advancements? Our investments in tech and automation include 64 projects, but just over $40 million and almost 80 reports. And it includes both research into some of those fundamental questions to understand the impact of AI, like who's impacted now and who might be in the future, as well as how we might benefit from improved productivity, and ultimately trying to master the technology so that it's working for people instead of working on people. And part of the way we're doing that is we're looking at how adoption can happen in key areas of the economy like healthcare. So we've worked with the Michener Institute for Education and the University Health Network, which is Canada's largest network of hospitals, to enhance some work that they've done on how AI can be integrated into delivering health services. So now we're supporting a second phase of that work, looking at innovative workplace education to build the staff's skills and capabilities to use AI-enabled tools and improve patient outcomes while also managing all of the privacy that goes into our good healthcare system. Now, one of the things about the degree of unpredictability that we're seeing in the world is that in Canada, it's going to be disproportionately felt by our small and medium-sized enterprises, who make up the vast majority of companies in the Canadian economy and account for most private sector employment, as well as contributing about half of Canada's GDP annually. So the shape of our economy in many important ways is shaped by SMEs, but they also tend to have lower productivity levels in part because they've got less capacity for skills development, and a result, for example, are slower to adopt things like new technology. Firm size affects capacity in lots of ways. The sophistication and formality of management processes, including human resources systems, the ability to take advantage of economies of scale, to access capital, the ability to engage in long-term planning and absorb opportunity costs, like when workers need to go off the job site in order to train and develop new skills. A resilient economy means supporting SME adaptability to integrate that productivity enhancing technology or to optimize workforce skills through more effective recruitment and support for training. And the solutions with the best chance of driving greater SME investment in reskilling and upskilling and employee development are the ones that meet SME's short-term skill needs and lower the time and cost barriers for them to do it. So as we think about this, we're trying to think about how can approaches that effectively address SME barriers to investing in training or adopting HR practices be scaled up to become more sustainable. What kind of approaches or tools are best suited to helping SMEs assess and recognize skills on the labor market and bring them into their firms. And we've been working with a number of really great partners, including some of our really impressive sector councils and sector associations who've got deep roots with employers in their sectors. And to date, we've managed to pull together a group of around 15 projects and invested about $10 million to do so. And a good example of the way that we're working in this space is a continued piece of work that we're doing with trusted partners in the manufacturing sector that's now starting to expand. It's looking to scale up a pay-for-performance model for employer investment and training, where employers have been reimbursed up to 70% of the cost of training per worker, up to $3,000, as well as also providing support for foregone productivity when workers have to be away to train. This work's been led by the Excellence in Manufacturing Consortium with our evaluation partner at Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. And in the next phase, it's going to now expand to start to test this model in areas like food processing, biotechnology, and in environmental industries. Finally, it's still clear to us that diversifying workforces continues to be a nearly universal and undoubtedly important business strategy across sectors and industry. Efforts to diversify the skilled trades, for example, to try to bring in more women and newcomers, racialized and indigenous people, are going to be critical to building the infrastructure that's going to let us meet big goals, from net zero to shoring up a stronger manufacturing sector and weathering the Trump tariff storm. But progress still needs to move faster, and we need to focus on strategies that actually work. And so some of the things that we're trying to identify as we think about how to build a more inclusive economy include the most effective approaches for integrating wraparound services in skill-based programs for equity-seeking groups. And how do these approaches overcome barriers like funding that typically compromise the effectiveness of those kinds of programs? How can we incentivize and support more employers to recognize and change challenges in their HR practice to help to integrate folks coming in like newcomers and recognize their skills and support their growth? And as we think about a renewed focus on Canada's North, how can we, in emerging and evolving sectors across the North, make sure that new forms of skills development are led by and equipping Indigenous community members to take advantage of those opportunities and align with visions of their livelihood on the ground? So here we continue to try to make investments. This is a big part of our portfolio with more than 90 projects and nearly $50 million invested. And one of the ones that we've been most excited by is our work with the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia and their FAST program, stands for Facilitating Access to Skilled Talent. This is a free self-paced online program that includes assessments developed in partnership with Canadian employers that focus on Canadian workplace culture, sector-specific competency assessments for both technical and soft skills, and bringing people in contact with learning opportunities that can help to fill the gaps for newcomers as they're arriving in Canada. And in the next phase of this work, we're going to continue to do the evaluation with IECBC and help FAST to expand access to more newcomers, and also their work with the government of New Brunswick and New Brunswick Community College, Collège communautaire du Nouveau-Brunswick, to create a bilingual FAST platform to meet that region's needs. Last, of course, and not least, around sustainable jobs. Regardless of the disruption that's caused by tariffs, Canada and the rest of the world is in the midst of a massive transformation toward a lower emission economy to ultimately get to net zero. But while most of the discussion about the impacts of the net zero transition have focused on the technology and energy systems that we need to make that transition, as we try to get to those targets, some of which are just a decade away now, we have to talk about how we'll have the skilled workers we need in position to do the work. Who's going to create the technology, build the infrastructure, maintain the electric grids, all of which are going to drive us toward our objectives on this front. So we need to think about questions like what approaches and resources are effective at helping communities and regions proactively make transitions. How could decarbonization pathways in Canada affect demand for and supply of skilled tradespeople? There's a real host of questions that we can be asking ourselves about this. And we've made a range of investments in this area to date, proactively working with experts in climate transitions like the Canadian Climate Institute, the Smart Prosperity Institute, and others. And one of the ones that we're going to continue to work on going forward is with the Canadian Skills Training and Employment Coalition, SISTEC, to build on their previous FSC project and replicate a layoff aversion model that tests options to support both employers and workers before layoffs happen as they're grappling with shifting economic landscapes through skills development while a company's retooling. This is a model that we're trying to test its application in Canada. It was actually developed in the United States. And SISTEC and its training partners are going to support a number of manufacturers right now, aiming for 6 manufacturers impacted by the transition to manufacturing electric vehicles and the 14,000 workers who work at those firms. Of course, knowing Canada's auto sector is also disproportionately at risk in the current environment around tariffs, this will also potentially have the opportunity to make major contributions to the long-term sustainability of that sector, and this work really couldn't be more timely. I want to talk to you now about the Insights in Action Tour. When we undertook this, I think we understood that it was a big ambition And I'm happy to say that we've now are wrapping up with you today, but that we managed to hold 6 in-person events in cities across the country, in Charlottetown, Toronto, Vancouver, Regina, Edmonton, and Montreal in person. And we held a virtual session with partners in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Inuvialuit settlement region. When we set out on the tour, we had a few objectives, including to share the insights from our work and the work of our project partners, this question of what's worked and for whom and in what context, but also as well what hasn't and why. We wanted to engage with many of our partners and stakeholders across the country about the enduring barriers to resolving key challenges in our labor market, and then to test the relevance of these focus areas that I just described to you. How do they resonate with stakeholders from different regions, and what needs to come next? And as you can see from the next few slides, which show photos of the different events, the response was really wonderful. Frankly, we appreciate it more than we can say. We worked closely to co-host events with local partners in every region, where we were warmly welcomed across the country. The venues were really, as you can see, they were really popping. They were really nice spaces. They were on the water or overlooking the river or with a great view of downtown. And the tour has really set the precedent that FSC events are beautiful and delicious. And that's not a bad reputation to have. Seriously, we got so many comments about the food, and they were all positive. It was great. People felt well taken care of. And we had really meaningful conversations across the country. In Charlottetown, Lee McKinney from BioVectra, a leading pharmaceutical and bio pharma firm, gave a really powerful speech about the impact of investments in workplace training on the growth and development of that company. And in our virtual session in the North, we had really honest conversations between folks from Entrepreneur North and Yukon Struct about the realities of working in the North and how funders can hinder or further that work. Well, we had more than 500 people attend the events. We had really engaging content and speakers, practical insights, and real life examples. And we had lots of opportunities for networking and collaboration. You can see here on the next slide, full of tiny font, that we really packed all of the agendas. Yeah, these are the agendas from the different meetings. You can see they were just full of lots of different partners and our consortium partners who were addressing a range of topics that we worked with our local host partner to tailor for the location that we were in. And the feedback was incredibly gratifying. 92% of respondents said their event was good, was excellent or very good. Almost half of respondents at each stop were actually first-time participants in an FSC event, so we're expanding our connections with people across the country. And nearly 6 in 10 of the participants rated the content as the main reason to attend the event. And we got some very good feedback in addition to that. I mean, what we heard overwhelmingly was that both FSC and the conversation that we were having with people were on the right track, that our focus areas were relevant, and that the priorities of stakeholders were broadly aligned across the skills and training ecosystem across the country. Don't get me wrong, we heard lots from partners loud and clear about what we're missing, particularly the trying to connect those broad priorities to the way that they manifest themselves locally or in specific sectors. And we're really honored that you would trust us enough to be honest with your feedback about that. And we've taken those comments on board. Many of these engagements took place prior to the tariff threats, but we also heard from our partners that we need to leave some space in our priorities for emerging issues. And we're glad we did. And as the ground continues to shift beneath us, we're all being asked to contribute and to pivot and pay attention to what's happening. So from region to region and sector to sector, we heard about shared challenges, like funding that's oriented towards training instead of employment outcomes. And that's often too short in duration, a point we hear you on, to really make lasting plans. It's also really hard to engage all the relevant actors in this discussion, from employers to labor to post-secondary institutions, government, and others. but that labor supply and demand don't just align themselves on their own without strategic investment and dialogue. And we heard over and over again, I think it's fair to say, about the shared opportunity in creative partnerships and collaboration, especially working with intermediary brokers. Partners like the Canadian Alliance for Skills and Training in the Life Sciences, or CASL, who we've partnered with and are able to get post-secondary institutions, employers, training organizations, unions, community organizations, and others to the table. And as a result, are now not only a leading skills development player in their sector on PEI, where they started, but they've now grown and expanded into British Columbia and Quebec. We also found that people really loved hearing from speakers from different regions in their own backyard. So whether it's Blue Door Services coming to BC to talk about bringing marginalized people into the construction trades, or IECBC talking about FAST in Atlantic Canada and pathways to newcomers for folks in that region. We heard from many of you that it was really valuable to learn about innovations across the country and that there were too few spaces to do that. And I think one of the things we took away from that and are now thinking about a lot in our work is I think people were expressing the sense that there's a lot of reinventing the wheel when what we're trying to do is connect the dots. Overwhelmingly, I think what we heard is that the role that FSE has been able to play has been welcomed, it's needed, and it's unique. It's different from what other sources of funding in the skills and training ecosystem are offering. The flexibility we can offer to let new ideas thrive and build in learning to bring those ideas to the point where scaling can happen is not something that's available all the time and everywhere. So as we think about what's next, it's pretty clear we're in an era of volatility and uncertainty, but there are still lots of opportunities. The disruption that will create opportunities to challenge long-standing barriers to success and productivity. Skills and training are going to be at the heart of how we pivot, how we make sure that people are resilient, how we make sure that we have those right people with the right skills in the right places at the right times. And we're starting from a good place. This is not all doom and gloom. Canadians are among the most skilled people in the world, according to the OECD, for example. But if we don't take this moment when we've kind of woken up a bit from a bit of a slumber to try to do better, we'll put our long-term opportunities at risk. FSC's niche is not necessarily to fund things forever. It's to fund innovation, to generate the evidence about what works, and to use that evidence to support scaling and expansion to support better policy and better programs. When we think about where we're headed, we're going to be doing more of what we've been talking about throughout my little speech here. So we're going to be scaling up more innovation projects. We were able to announce just a couple of weeks ago with the Honorable Stephen McKinnon, the Minister of Jobs and Families, another $14.3 million to expand more than a dozen innovative approaches to skills development with partners who we've been working with already. And in the coming weeks, we'll have more to say about some new partners that we're going to be working with. We're also supporting strategic research, investing in answering those key questions to better understand where we're going and the best way to get there. And we're trying to do that by also understanding some of the really fundamental questions in Canada, like how many people are participating in training and how much are they contributing from their own pocket, how much are their employers, how much are government. And we're building capacity and partnerships. I sort of hinted at this a moment ago. We did an open call in the fall and received more than 800 proposals. So as we're getting through those, we'll be inviting new partners in to tackle some of these key issues along with us. We're going to be sharing learning. We're going to continue to put out publications, host events. I'm not sure we're going to do a whole tour of the country this year because that was a ton of work, but we're still going to be reaching out and connecting with all of you through different avenues that we have for doing that. And we're going to be bringing partners together, working with our consortium partners to bring together people who are working on the questions, the important questions of skills development and training to chart a way forward. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to give you one slide here and invite you to connect with us in all of the different ways that we can. We've got some QR codes there to get access to our newsletter where you'll learn more about events that are coming. We've got a webinar coming up on April 2nd with the Transition Accelerator on workforce growth for a prosperous Canada. That's going to feature speakers from Electricity Human Resources Council and Canadian manufacturers and exporters talking about the impact of not just tariffs, but also how that then feeds into planning on the transition toward a net zero economy. You can read more from our State of Skills series. These are summaries of some of the best evidence we've got from the projects that we've been working with to help make sense of some of these big issues and what we see from them to date. And of course, you can also reach out to any of us through our website, through our email address there, LinkedIn, social media, and others. So I want to thank you for being here today. I hope that this helped to give a sense of what we're taking away from a year spent going around the country and talking to folks. And as I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Noel, for sharing about all the important work that FSC is doing. And also, speaking about the entire Insights in Action tour, seeing all those photos, it brings back lots of memories. And certainly it was quite a tour around the entire country. So we're going to open it up now. We're going to have a moment to, I'm sure some of you have some comments and some questions. So there are two separate spaces in the webinar here. In the chat, you can sort of add reactions, just general things you'd like to say. And if you have a question, there is actually an actual Q&A section at the bottom there. So take a moment to add any reactions, things you'd like to say in the chat. And if you have some questions, you can add them in the Q&A section. We'll be highlighting some of them for Noel to respond to. Those questions, some of them may be asked. We have the fabulous FSC team, some of whom are we'll be writing answers to some of them, and some of them will be able to actually have Noel answer live. So take a moment and see if you'd like have any questions you'd like the FSC team to answer. And I'm seeing that there are some initial questions that are coming in. So take a little moment to add any questions that are coming forward. Okay, we have a few questions here, and we'll be sort of a few questions. I'll read out one of them, Noel, and you can sort of reply to them. And there's a question here from someone from Sit Lali, who represents a nonprofit supporting newcomers get connected to the hidden job market, Hispanotech. So how can we work more closely with FSC to advance these efforts and amplify your resources? Any thoughts, Noel, coming forward from that question?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so the first thing I would say is we got a whole bunch of colleagues in the webinar here who will, I think, probably make an effort to reach out to you. We have lots of opportunities to connect through events that we're hosting where you can join as a participant, and if we can connect directly and learn a little bit more about your work, we can look for where those areas of alignment are. I'm sure that we have some connection to the kind of work that you're doing, and part of what we're trying to do is figure out how to, as you say, sort of how to amplify each other's work. So I'll ask one of my colleagues to maybe message you in the chat to get your email address, and we can follow up that way. And then I think more broadly, right? You can see the volume of stuff that FSC is producing. So there's lots of our research and reports. There's lots of interactive ways on the website to figure out how you can find things about what we've already been doing and pull some of those resources, which may also be able to support your work, whether it's research or, understanding from one of our projects, the kind of insights that came out of it. So I think there's a bunch of different ways, but we'll also figure out how we can reach out to you directly.
Great. Thanks, Noel. And there's another question on immigration here. It might be a nice follow-up question. Let's see if we can find this. This is a question from Amal. In your opinion, Noel, what could be an innovative thing in the space of immigration? I'm doing a master's in innovation, September 2025, and cannot seem to find what to focus on. Thank you. So I'm curious, Noel, to hear your thoughts on that sort of follow-up question in the field of immigration.
Yeah, I mean, the terrain has obviously shifted quite a lot just in the last few months, right? And so with some of the new uh, constraints that or changes in the way that we are bringing people into the country, I think the spaces for innovation then are really kind of how to adapt to the new reality. And the truth is, like, we're really focused right now on the changes to immigration levels and in particular around some of the more temporary pathways into the country. And I'm going to confess I'm not a full expert in immigration policy, but one of the things I think it points out to me is that we had a big challenge before any of those changes occurred to really making sure that as newcomers came into the country, we were reflecting and benefiting from the skills and assets that they were bringing with them already, right? That challenge goes back quite a long time, right? So I think the way that we have been approaching these questions is to try to work with partners who are looking at um, how to do better on that piece. How do we better recognize the skills of people who are coming in? And how do we then put newcomers into a position to succeed? And that's both as they're entering into the labor market or entering into a firm, but then also through their career, right? This is the other thing is I think empirically, there's evidence that newcomers, even when they've been here for a number of years, struggle with advancement in their career, right? So there's kind of two angles there that are really important to focus on, and that's regardless of kind of the levels issue. I think that those are quite prevalent and frankly longstanding, not really new.
You know, there's a question that was put in the chat by Gary and it was then brought forward again by Lisa. The question was, has prior learning assessment methods been studied at FSC for enabling SME adaptability? So have prior learning assessment methods been studied at FSC for enabling SME adaptability?
Yeah, I think probably I've got colleagues on the webinar who would know in more detail exactly, which projects would include a component of prior learning assessment. I think um, my observation over kind of the number of years of my career is that prior learning assessment has tended to be in Canada has tended to be situated more on an education pathway kind of stream. And it has fluctuated in how much it's an area of focus. One of the things about small and medium-sized enterprises is they often don't have big built-out HR capacities, which is something that you need to do prior learning assessment. Until I would say until fairly recently, it's been a pretty labor intensive process. But I think that probably there's technology that could help to speed up some of those processes. But SMEs also need support. And I think one of the things that we've been trying to explore is how we can pool resources that they can then benefit from so that they don't have to take on the whole um, business of whether it's prior learning assessment or skill development and training, right? So a couple of examples, we've worked with some of the networks of provincial chambers of commerce in Ontario and Alberta, Nova Scotia, and a couple of others to try to build some digital resources that they can pull from, both the chambers themselves and also their members. We've done the same thing with some sector councils, right? Where they all had an interest in, or a number of them had an interest, for example, in the development of micro-credentials. Well, you can support that one off and sector by sector, but what we've been trying to do is encourage collaboration so that those micro-credentials start to have currency across sectors and you build economies of scale that way.
Great, thank you. We have time for a few more questions here. And Lisa, great. I like the back and forth in the chat. Lisa's been adding some questions to the chat as you were speaking, speaking about how in a credentials-based society, skills recognition is still currency. There's a question here from, so considering the rapid shift to reduce trade, and professional practice barriers between provinces and territories. What do you see FSC doing in the short term to assist workers and employers to better mobilize supply chains and employment mobility opportunities across the country? I can maybe repeat that just to make sure it's is it good?
Yeah, because one of our colleagues asked that same question in our full team meeting today. So I
Okay,
thought,
so good. I will just repeat this so everyone's able to hear quickly. Considering the rapid shift to reduce trade and professional practice barriers between provinces and territories, what do you see FSC doing in the short term to assist workers and employers to better mobilize supply chains and employment mobility opportunities across the country? Whew, there you go.
yeah. So I think I think it's kind of a complex question. And part of my response when this came up earlier today with our team was I actually am not sure I understand what governments have committed to so far, right? So one part of it is like we got to figure out what they're saying they're going to do so that we can kind of find our niche into it. The second thing is, labor mobility issues, interprovincial labor mobility issues have at least a couple of dimensions, right? The trade barrier piece has tended to focus on questions in the regulated professions, right? Where you you're in an occupation where there are standards and there's a body that governs them in one place, and to go to another one, you've got to pay some money, they've got to look at your paperwork, like those kind of barriers. And those regulatory things may or may not have a place for FSC, but there's a broader question about what does it take if we need people to move from one geographic space to another because an industry is growing or because an industry is in decline. And part of what we've seen, and this is a really big part of the whole question about sustainable jobs and the transitions that come with them, is the all of the pieces that go around that, from housing to childcare to understanding how to navigate a new school system, right? How to maintain your quality of living as you go from one job to another. I mean, we've done a little bit of that through research work that we've been a part of. Some of our pilots are focused on these questions. We call them wraparound supports, but they're really about like, what are all the things that people need besides training in order to stay resilient and keep their skills up to date and relevant, right? So I think we're at a point or kind of growing to a point where we now have a perspective on these things and we are certainly sharing that in conversations with governments about what are they going to need to make sure is in place, how do they design programs that are going to be most effective. So it doesn't necessarily cut to the heart of this conversation between the federal government and provinces about reducing interprovincial trade barriers or reducing interprovincial labor mobility barriers, because some of that is about like what are you going to do with the regulatory bodies in medical fields, right? And we may or may not contribute to that. But this broader question about like what do people need to have in place in order to successfully transition and avoid disruption and avoid really much worse outcomes on their pathway to jobs. I think we do have some things to share and contribute, and we'll continue to do that as we understand how this stuff's evolving.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Another question that's come in here. Does your organization help project teams connect or collaborate with researchers or other collaborators? For example, if we were looking to work with someone specializing in durable skills development, could you help facilitate that connection?
Yeah, so we certainly do that in the context of the projects and the partnerships that we bring into our way of working, right? So there's a really important part of helping, especially organizations with small internal capacity, to stand up, these ideas that they've got. And so we do connect them with evaluation partners and try to help them facilitate that work. As you know, with Opus Group, we're working with a cohort of folks who sort of have a really bright idea, but actually need the support to do the design work before it's ready to go in the field. It's a bit challenging for us to kind of do that broadly. Like I would love to be able to sort of offer a concierge service to the whole ecosystem and play some of that matchmaking role. But we've got our own constrained capacity at a certain point. But one of the things that's certainly true is I think there are some resources already available on our site that might be of use, including just identifying who are some of the groups that we've worked with that might be similar to yours or working in a similar sector, and you can kind of see who they've partnered with. And then, like, I'm not sure that we can do this at scale, but we can certainly kind of look at one-off questions for folks who've got a query.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions, and rest assured the FSC team is seeing all of them and we'll get back to you. I know that some of them are being answered in the chat there as well. We did have another question that we wanted to ask you, and this question is around counsel, as I mentioned to you at the beginning. And the question is, what counsel do you have for FSC going forward? So, feeling into all these big news items that we've spoken about and taking into account as well what Noel has shared, what do you think that FSC should be focused on? What counsel, advice, ideas you have? So you can add those to the chat. We'll allow them to come in. And while you're adding them, I'll just mention some of the things that Noel had mentioned in his presentation, which included scaling up innovation projects, supporting strategic research, building capacity and partnerships, sharing learning, convening partners. So some of the directions that Noel has named, but I'd like to open it up to all of you if you have any ideas, thoughts, directions. And what I'll be doing is when you have some of those ideas coming in the chat, I'll read out a few of them, and then I'll pass it over to you, Noel, to give a bit of a reaction to any of those that might be there. So take a little moment and just think, what counsel do you have for FSC going forward? And this is a moment to really speak your mind, share any advice, any thoughts, any things that you think would be helpful. As you can see, there's a lot of work that's being done to really move the needle, to really have a systemic impact across the country. So your thoughts and ideas are quite welcome. And you can just add those in the chat. We'll take a moment to wait for them to come in. I think while we also wait for those answers to come in, I know there was a question here that was getting some attention, and I can maybe just pass it over to you, Noel. And this was around the let's see if we can find that question. This is around EDI. And I'm going to see, do you think that the US attack on EDI will filter into Canada? As we know that our economic growth and labor markets rely on inclusivity and immigration. So again, feel free to put your sort of counsels in the chat. And while we're waiting, I would like, this question from Janet has been getting some attention. So feel free to answer Noel as we wait.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think someone pointed out that there's some evidence of it happening in different places in the country as well, right? You know, I think it's hard to say exactly how that issue will play itself out. And there's certainly like different kind of rounds of reaction as things with our friends in the US continue to shift, right? I think what we have experienced so far, including since January, right, when the new Trump administration came in, that keeps me somewhat optimistic about this is that I haven't seen I think maybe some of the language is shifting, but I haven't seen a big shift in the way that employers that we work with keep talking about where they need to find new sources of skill and talent and people. I think there's still broadly a recognition that, especially with the changes that have been made, the alignment with the changes to immigration really mean that we actually are going to have to work even harder to reach people who are more distant from contributing their skills to the labor market. And as I talked about earlier, there are more than one dimension to just the question of how people come into firms or come into the labor market. It's not just about getting your first foot in the door. It's also about how is that career journey going to go? And in so many sectors, we have, because of aging demographics, like we actually have really big long-term challenges. Who's going to take over the SMEs that where the current leadership is within sight of retirement. That's a massive issue, for example, in the construction industry, where lots of contracting firms don't have succession planning. It's another issue we got to think about with SMEs is succession planning, and so you know whether whether we call it the same thing, whether the discourse about it coarsens, I think is hard to say. There's a certain reality about where we find ourselves that will make it hard to simply walk away from the idea that we need people, that we need a diverse workforce, and that we need people to feel like they have equity in that workforce and in our economy, and that in order to do that, that they need to feel included, right? So um, I'm kind of hesitant to speculate beyond that, so especially because everything is changing so rapidly. Yeah, I think there's a certain, so I kind of referred to it as it's a business issue, right? And I think it's one that won't go away just because people are inclined to kind of throw stones right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Noel, so much for answering the questions today. And I'm seeing in the chat there's some answers I'll read out in regards to some counsel. I'd also like to invite everyone, we'd like to invite you as sort of a closing of this webinar to add, for you, what's one step forward? What's one way you'd like to contribute going forward? So one way you'd like to contribute going forward, what's the next step for your professional role, perhaps personally, maybe something that resonated today that you'd like to really action. So I'd like to invite you to add that to the chat. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to read out some of this counsel that was there. Um, Jane wrote, I'd love to see webinars. I'd love to see webinars that disseminate lessons learned and successes from funded projects. Great idea. Vidya wrote, identify opportunities to set up focus centers of excellence in areas specifically impacted by change in US-Canada trade issues. So some really great ideas, and we'll be reading all of these. Again, we invite you to think about, what's the next step for you? And you can add that to the chat here. I would like to thank all of you for participating in whether it was just in this closing webinar or one of the stops in the Insights and Action Tour. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your lively participation in the chat. Don't hesitate to reach out. And after this closing of this webinar, we have a survey. We strongly encourage you to answer the survey. It really helps us adapt these webinars and these gatherings to make sure they're really aligned with your needs and interests. So thank you to the FSC team who's done such great work with this entire event series. Thank you all for your participation. And with 1 minute left, I will invite you to enjoy the rest of your days. And again, feel free to write in the chat a way you'd like to contribute going forward, add any of the reflections, and yes, the closing survey. So thank you everyone for coming, and we will be in touch with next steps.